IVM.
In just 21 days in January, there were 134 ceasefire violations across the line of control. In 2017, almost every month since August has had over 100 violations. How serious are these ceasefire violations? Why is this happening? Can India end this cycle of violence?
Welcome to the Pragati podcast, a weekly talk show on economics, public policy, and international relations. We're your hosts, Hamsini, Hariharan,
and Pavan, Srinath. Joining us in studio today is Lieutenant General Prakash Menon, who has spent over 40 years in the Indian Army and then 5 years in the government thereafter. He has had extended operational experience on the Siachen glacier, the line of control, and counterinsurgency operations in Kashmir. Currently, General Menon is the director of the Strategic Studies program at the Takshashila Institution.
Also joining us today is Pranay Kotasthane. Pranay is our colleague from the Takshashila Institution.
General Menon, why is the line of control heating up again?
Let's first try and understand that when you say that there are 100 violations every month, one of the issues which we have to worry about the statistics about the line of control violation is that everything is counted as a violation, which means even if a single gunshot has been fired, you would actually equate that with when 10 rounds of artillery is also fired. So the scale of the equation actually is quite imbalanced. So your description that it is the most dangerous spot in the world, I think, is not quite true, because if this has been going on for such a long time, then there must be some level of danger by which it doesn't cross. There is a line on top which doesn't happen, and you're still continuing to exchange fire. So danger to whom are you talking about? Is it danger that we'll have a larger conflict, or is it a danger to the people on the LC? So we have to be very careful of understanding what is happening there and why it is happening. That's what you actually asked.
General Menon, our knowledge about LOC only comes from the movie LOC Kargil. So we want to know from you, actually, what does the LOC look like? And even before that, what is this LOC?
Yeah, it's called the line of control. And previously with Pakistan, after the initial war in 48, 49, we had what is called the ceasefire line. And after the 71 war, we had, and it's demarcated on a map which has been exchanged. So the line which has been drawn today, which we call the line of control, is an accepted line on the ground which is marked on the map and known to both sides. But the problem is that this is an unnatural division of terrain. And therefore that's where the complications are. So the line starts from the northernmost point at what you call NJ 9842, which is slightly north of Kargil. And there the agreement said that it will be northward towards the glacier. And that line northwards toward the glacier has different interpretations. So that's where the glacier, Siachen glacier problem has happened. And then it proceeds south, goes through high altitude terrain in J&K, in Kashmir, then comes down towards the plain of Jammu. And this line actually is the one which is disputed, and therefore the rest of the portion is called the international boundary, where you have boundary pillars and accepted international boundary. So this line essentially is a line which has been accepted by both sides, but it is under dispute, and that is the status of that. And what does it look like? Well, it's most part, especially in Ladakh, it's in the Kargil area, very high altitude, barren mountains. Then as you come southwards, it's not only mountainous, but it's also got forested terrain. And a combination of the mountains with forests makes infiltration that much more easier. It's also, as you come down south, it again has forests on both the sides. So when you have an unnatural line which divides two nations, you have terrain configurations which are varied. And now that both the armies have been practically eyeball to eyeball for several decades, it is also highly militarized.
General Menon, you mentioned that the border is unnatural. What would a more natural border be like? Do we have examples of that in the international border with Pakistan or elsewhere?
Normally, actually, countries find these various, either they are mountains or you find basically water obstacles, if they are, which can actually easily demarcate the two countries. In essence, this is the Radcliffe line. He drew a line on the map, which he had no idea what it was, divided the country, and therefore even villages actually at that time, the line went through some of these villages. So you had half the village on one side, half towns on the other side. So what would be natural would be you have natural configurations which can be identified, basically in terms of the terrain features. The best, of course, would be water, where let's say you have the Kishanganga and you have, which is a river there, or you have the Indus, where you can actually easily demarcate. So one bank is held by the other and the other bank is held by another country. That sort of thing does not exist because it is the line drawn on the map by people who do not know the ground. And that's how the legacy of this problem lies in the unnatural division of the Indo-Pak border itself, called the Radcliffe line.
General Menon, you mentioned briefly that in some places the troops are eye to eye with each other. So you commanded troops in Siachen, right? So even in that place, were the troops visible to the other side?
Yeah, actually Siachen is slightly different because there the distance between you and the enemy is quite a lot. I mean, between the Pakis and you are quite a lot because that is how the terrain configuration is. Although there are places where they are pretty close, but that's more an exception than the rule. Whereas on the LC, on the line of control, there are many places where you are practically eyeball to eyeball. I'm not quite sure because I'm actually dated on that account whether with the heating up of the LC, so on, and the constant exchange of fire, how they are managing the eyeball to eyeball, because it's easy for you to actually knock the other guy off as it is easy for him to knock you off. So there would be some tactical arrangements which would have been made by both sides to avoid that thing. But the eyeball to eyeball still remains because it's close and you can see, and therefore you dig trenches, you protect yourself, all movement is under cover, you know the normal tactics which takes place. So the soldier will always find a way to preserve himself and fight.
As you said, Gen Menon, man-made borders are rather unnatural. So we construct fences, right? Is all of this border fenced? Where is it fenced? How do we cope with the differences in terrain?
There was no fence before, but ever since I think the 90s, late 90s, we started, or early 2000s, we started the fence. And it was an idea which General Widge, when he was the Chief of Army Staff, he is the one who mooted the idea. The idea was to fence it, and that's what we have done. So we have fenced practically the entire line of control. But the fence is not on the line of control, at least in most places. It must be slightly behind because in some places when the fencing was on, firing was taking place, so you couldn't carry out the fencing activities, so the fence is actually brought back. So there would be a distance between the fence and actual line of control itself, I mean, in most places. And the fence, therefore, is an obstacle system. But any obstacle system is as good as your ability to mount surveillance so that you can look at the obstacle system throughout and react to anybody who's trying to breach it. So if you have, the LC is about 760 odd kilometers. So if you have such a large this thing, and if you have to mount constant surveillance on it, you could calculate, and the terrain is difficult, and it's forested, so your observation and your visibility is also limited. Then you could just imagine the difficulty of keeping it, every portion, under constant surveillance. So it's a challenge which the troops have to face. The fence certainly has helped in actually being able to restrict infiltration, in the sense that we are able to either catch them before they eat the fence, or we know that the fence has been breached, so we can take action soon after that. So it depends. It's a sort of, it has helped in dealing with the infiltration, but it has not stopped infiltration, because it is physically impossible. It's a permanent system. The person who wants to cross the fence can do it at the point of his choosing, which means you keep watching it, you know your pattern of activity which you try to give out, not a pattern. But since you can't watch every place and every point, you'll always find a way to get around it, sometimes underneath it, sometimes over it, sometimes through it. So the fence has helped, but it will not stop infiltration.
General Menon, you use this word called ceasefire, right? So what is this ceasefire? When does it get violated? How does that work?
It's actually the firing on the line of control has escalated ever since the early 90s, late 80s, 1890s, when that was a time which was the dawn of Pakistan abetting insurgency in J&K. So we had large groups of people who went across and came back. And that was the time when actually the firing exchange had started. It continued for a long time till we came to what is called the Ceasefire Agreement, which is still in force, in 2003. And as per the Ceasefire Agreement, it's an agreement between both armies signed by the respective DGMOs, which says that you are not supposed to fire across. I mean, you're not supposed to open fire. And we have a system by which the DGMOs can talk, so they do every week. And they can also pick up a phone and talk to the other DGMO if they want to. So the ceasefire has been in place in 2003 till, and of course, violation of ceasefire would mean that somebody has fired. And it is always the case that each side will blame the other for being the first to open fire. And therefore, it is difficult to establish actually who started it, and both sides would blame each other. But there was an agreement that you should not open fire. So that sort of continued. It held. Soon after that, it carried on about 2008 onwards, when it started in bits and pieces. It started getting, the LC was getting hot, fire exchange was taking place. But even when it was, there was a certain limitation to it, that it would wax and wane. It would actually, escalate for some time and come down. So remember, by which time, to the 2003, we were both nuclear powers. So that also probably would have cast a shadow on the type of escalation that you could expect. And what we see now is the escalation levels have now reached the highest ever, because and the point at which departure for this apparently is sometime between after 2014 onwards, with last year being the highest. And if January itself has got 124 violations, that's, January is a time when actually it's most of the places, especially in the northern parts, the snows are still there. It's very cold. And despite that, if there are so many violations, and I would presume that most of these violations are in Jammu, where it is not so cold, But that's a very large number of violations. But I think we should still, we should have a look, if you really want to analyze it, what are these violations about? What of weapons have been used? Was it firing by normal weapons or just automatics, or was it artillery being exchanged, which is the area, or was it mortar? So that would give you a degree of exchange. But the fact is, there is no doubt about it, that for the last couple of years, both sides have resorted to firing, and firing by heavy weapons, which I would mean that they're using mortars and artillery, and nothing more than that, because that's where it seems to be that both have drawn a line, which is not, it's not an agreement, but it's actually part of the lingua franca of the exchange of fire itself, that they won't use more than that. But there's no guarantee as to where that can take us. So what we see now is certainly an escalation of the LC, and consequent to that, there is obviously more casualties on both sides, both military and civilian. And that's something which is a complete violation of the ceasefire agreement. So it's practically as if the ceasefire agreement does not exist in practice, although it exists on paper.
So the heating up of the border, more ceasefire violations, do you think they have something to do with the surgical strikes, so to speak, of what the current government sort of endorsed?
No, I think surgical strikes is just one particular action undertaken last year in September. But that is part of the larger pattern of activity which has been taking place. Well, let's put the activity in, what is it that is taking place? There's an exchange of fire, and that exchange of fire means that you could be firing, a sniper could kill somebody on either side, either they could kill one of us, which means you just have one person positioned in such a place and he takes on somebody who comes in his sight. So from that level onwards, you could use your light machine guns, your medium machine guns, and then go up the scale and have mortars and artillery and so on. Or you could actually have direct firing weapons, which are quite deadly because they can actually destroy bunkers and so on. So you have this level of firing. That is one issue. The other one is actually the cross-border military activity, which means that how much is the case that they have come across and actually attacked our posts or killed our men, and as you know, some of them were beheaded and so on. So there has been this intensity of activity and diversity of activity, which means that each side is exchanging blows to a considerable extent and doing it in military tactical actions to damage or cause as much of damage and destruction to the other. So that's been the pattern which is related. But it's been capped at the level of artillery, and also those actions are normally contained to a particular area. It wouldn't be that the entire LC is alive and there is fighting. No, that would not be the case. So in essence, we see an exchange of energy taking place. Why is it taking place? If you would like to ask, it's difficult to answer, except if I take a cue from our own chief statement that the pressure on the Pakistanis would be kept up and the LC firing would likely to continue till the time that they stop infiltration and their support for proxy war especially in J&K. So if that is the reason why it is being done, then probably you could question the issue as to how is the firing going to help stop these two, because it never has. In fact, the ceasefire agreement came about despite the fact that the infiltration has held, despite the fact that the infiltration has continued. So if we now take up a position that we are going to do this and put pressure on them, there is a problem here. The problem is like this, that the use of force must be connected to political purpose. In this case, the political purpose is to get Pakistan, apparently, if you want them not to do, to support the elements in Kashmir, it means that they want Pakistan to stop supporting the elements, either sending people from across or giving help of any other sort. Well, the problem is like this, that you can affect his will, but this is not a will which can be easily subdued, because he has also got a free will. When you sit and exchange fire across the LC, the issue is that he can fire on you as much as you can fire on him. Because if you want him to stop firing, then you have to cross the LC, physically go and destroy him and capture him and hold that ground. But that is not what we can do. So,
and that's definitely not what we can do under the nuclear umbrella.
Yeah, in the sense that we wouldn't want to escalate it by actually going and capture territory and start a war. So the exchange of fire actually strengthens will on both sides. And we must understand that as far as our relations with Pakistan is concerned and their relations with us, in a societal sense, there's a visceral sense of hatred which prevails on both sides. They do anything to us and we do anything to them, has got a lot of support from both societies. It's got a lot of societal support to cause damage, treat Pakistan as the enemy, Pakistanis treat India as the enemy, and therefore the will is actually, when you do it at this level and cap it like this, of the populace, and I would say of the men who are actually facing the fire, is strengthened, not weakened. So this begs the question that what are you therefore achieving it? Because force is supposed to affect his will. Instead, it strengthens it. And of course, Pakistanis use it to tell the whole world that this is the most dangerous place on earth, because they would like the Indo-Pak situation to have international attention, and so that they are watchful of it. And of course, the Pakistani army uses it to magnify what they call the Indian threat by actually also amplifying the casualties which are caused, and then they will accuse us of actually killing civilians. So the Indian threats get magnified, and the Pakistani army therefore actually gets advantage of it. So to say that this is the most dangerous part on earth and so on is actually the Pakistani line. It is not, because if it was danger, then it would have blown up to much further levels long ago. We have actually, it's interesting to see that we can exchange fire for so long periods, yet cap it without an understanding, but probably with a tacit understanding between both the sides. That's how it works.
General Menon, you briefly mentioned if the political aim of India is to stop infiltration, then how does a more active line of control help in that? In the sense that if the line of control is more active, is it easier for infiltration to happen? I would assume so.
See, the political aim is actually the infiltration. Stopping infiltration is the military aim. The political aim is stopping support from across the border for terrorism. That's a political aim. And we must understand that here we are dealing with an entity who has not stopped supporting the Afghan Taliban despite all the pressure being brought on them by the most powerful nation in the world, the United States. Because it's deniable. You just deny that anybody is infiltrating and you don't know anything about it, but we know, and anybody who knows the LC knows, that there is no way that infiltration can take place without the active connivance of the Pakistani military posts which are there. It's just not possible. So, firstly, it is deniable. So, that Pakistan is good at that. The issue whether firing will help to stop infiltration, I would certainly say it does not help. And let me just explain why. If you're firing to hurt him, which means you try and destroy the posts which you think are abetting infiltration, well, you've done that for quite some time. We did this before the previous ceasefire, and we found that the infiltration doesn't stop, because actually when you destroy a post, they will actually relocate the post, have it somewhere else. So, and I think theoretically we need to understand that the destruction of his post strengthens his will. It does not weaken it, because he can actually bear the cost. Although some of my friends think that actually he will run out of ammunition, that's rubbish. He'll get as much as ammunition that he wants. So, and infiltration and firing also puts a lot of pressure on our military about stopping infiltration, because when you have firing, you have to actually be more alert. Then you can't be exposed. Your movement is restricted, because counter-infiltration measures requires movement to take place of men. So all this puts us actually at a disadvantage, because there is more pressure on the men. We have already spread out to stop infiltration, because we have got to do both. On the LC, you have to guard your post, which means, you choose the place where you're going to fight, but you also have to guard against movement, which means that you spread yourselves out thinner on the ground. And that makes you more vulnerable. He doesn't have to do it because there is no infiltration taking place from this side. And so I don't buy the argument that the LC firing will stop infiltration by putting pressure on him, and he's going to come and ask you, please stop firing, I will stop infiltration. That's not going to happen. That I think military leaders over there know it quite well. And probably they need to actually disabuse the political leadership if they think that this is going to reduce infiltration. And I don't think the figures of infiltration itself supports the notion that for the last 3 years, the infiltration has gone down because of the firing. I don't think so.
Further, if there is a lot of activity across the line of control, a lot of firing, won't the fence itself be affected?
Well, the fence, could be affected if artillery is fired or mortars are fired and so on. But those could be easily repaired. Actually, the fence is affected more, especially in the northern areas, because of snowfall. And that's where each year, a lot of effort has been put to put the fence back. Although now I think the engineers have probably made it more sturdier. It doesn't get affected so much by the snow. The fence does, you must understand that the artillery which is used, which can possibly affect the fence, would probably be used on targets which are hardened, or on soft targets which can you can hit a village with artillery. And one of the things which has been happening, and this is what is the part, is that both sides seems to be hitting villages, although I'm sure that we wouldn't be aiming for villages, but when the artillery is fired, it's possible that villages in the vicinity also can get affected. Civilians who are in the open can get affected. And it is also the case, as far as we are concerned, from what we know about ourselves, that the Pakistani artillery deliberately targets our villages. And therefore, there's now been, many villages have to be evacuated. We've got camps where these people have now been housed. And if you look at the media reports from the other side, the Pakistani seems to be complaining of the same thing. So it is, as the situation is, that you can try to hurt him and he can also has a free will to hurt you. So it is an exchange which can go on for a long time. But the question we need to ask is, who is benefiting? How is this resolving the issue at hand? And I don't think that it is resolving the issue at hand. But from our point of view, maybe the fact that we could use it and display it as that we are taking a tough stand against Pakistan is something which is the narrative which sort of dovetails into the ruling party's basic stance on dealing with Pakistan, that we are acting tough on them. The question is, how does that benefit us? And that question doesn't seem to be answered by the fact that we can continue this exchange and yet benefit. Yes, you can benefit if you want to actually raise the temperature of jingoism internally by saying that these are the actions, we have killed so many of them, we've done this, we've destroyed that. It's all fine. That definitely will help domestically. But does it help to curb the problem which you're seeking to curb, which is infiltration and cross-border terrorism support? I don't think so. And surgical strike is just one of the, I think it was a bold action taken, which is part of, you can say, an answer to what they did to us in Uri. I mean, that was just one major action which is taken, which we have publicized, of course. But that's only, it's going to happen once in a while. This thing is that now it's part of our doctrine, so we can do it again. So we'll have to see as to next time what we'll do. The point is, one message is across that we are trying to make is that any violation will not be left alone and will be answered in kind. So what in effect is, there is now a cycle of revenge which is prevailing on the LC. So it is what you could call, at least tactically, reciprocal butchery which will prevail. Not butchery of a kind which the state cannot bear, because it'll add up to quite a lot, but in terms of incident, it would be an individual incident would actually have much less casualties than the overall figures which we might think of. But in a political sense, it looks quite meaningless.
If I were to play the devil's advocate, wouldn't this type of action over the LOC increase deterrence and hence raise the costs for Pakistan to engage in terrorist activities?
Yeah, that's the fallacy. Firstly, it is not deterrence, because deterrence has already failed. They are for many years been supporting terrorism. There many years been infiltration. So better the thing is, we will have to compel them. It will be compellence more than deterrence. And that's the question I'm asking, that if you cannot use the entire might of your military, then you're not able to effect his will. And we can't use that might because of other issues, especially nuclear issues. We are using it in dosages which he can bear, continue to bear, and inflict similar dosages on us. So when you look at the balance sheet of the exchange, how do we expect that he will first beg for mercy? And knowing the type of relations we have and the historical legacy which underlines it, that's not going to happen. And we knew it. That's why we went in for the ceasefire in 2003. And it was well thought of. And I see no reason why it should not be imposed again, unless we stick to the fact that we'll continue to make sure that we answer their infiltration and the cross-border terrorism through LC firing. That's not the instrument which is going to be of any political value in terms of dealing with Pakistan. It might have political value domestically.
Gen Menon, if I could change tracks a little bit, could you tell us a little about how the movement of people, that is civilians, happens across the line of control? There are, like you said, certain villages and others which were sort of split when the ceasefire agreement was drawn. And what's that like today? Do people come over from the Pakistan side to India?
Well, Actually, people don't come over. That used to happen in the old days. In fact, in the old days, sometimes marriage barats used to go from one side of the LC to the other. That also used to take place. No longer. So who are the people actually who come across civilians? There are certain instances where, let's say, somebody from Kashmir has gone across, got married there, had children, worked there, now he wants to come back. So what he does is probably takes the entire family, he's got kids, he will probably pay off the Pakistani border post, and then he crosses that, and in the morning you find that there is this family of 4 or 5 or 6 or more than that sitting on your side of the LC. That means they're in your territory, and they refuse to go away.
Oh, and they can do this because our fence is not at the LC but a little behind.
Yes, I mean, obviously that makes it easier for them because fence is behind. So now we have no choice but actually they are now illegal people in our country. So you got to take them in, and then the normal process of civilian processing takes place. So that's the type of movement which takes place. All other movement are movements of infiltrators who are part of the terrorism infrastructure. I mean, they are coming there with either they come with the other fighters or they bring with them porters and so on who carry the heavy stuff. So that's the movement which is now mostly in place. Of course, towards the IBN in Jammu, there would be some amount of smuggling which is also there prevalent. But if there is firing and so on, normally the smugglers find better ways to cross.
General Menon, we used to hear about this thing called UNMOGIP, right? United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan. When I was in Srinagar, I did see they have an office there as well. What is this about? What do these people do?
Well, it dates back to the UN resolution of 1948, where this observer group was established. After all, we went to the UN ourselves. And therefore, they are supposed to be observers on both sides. They operate in Srinagar and in Islamabad. They have these observers which are there to be the neutral ones to see. But since the UN agreement was never implemented in its totality, India has been very, you can say, not very supportive of the observers itself. So the observers mostly are restricted to the LC from the Pakistani side, and they don't make much movement, or we don't sort of support most of their movements on the LC on our side. And therefore, they continue to be there. Before the 71 war, probably they were more active, but they are now much less than they were before. So as far as we are concerned, since we have part of the deal, we still respect them, their presence there, but we don't allow them free movement on the LC as much the Pakistanis does, because the Pakistanis would like to portray to the world that the Indians are the ones who are doing it. So you can actually craft a lot of incidents, bring them there and show this is what has been done. So, Pakistan is pretty good at that.
You briefly mentioned about this cycle of revenge. So as I can understand, there are two cycles operating. One is there is a political cycle of revenge, and then there's this military cycle of revenge. Are both these cycles in sync with each other? What happens when they go out of sync?
No, the political cycle is not another cycle. It is actually part of the same cycle. Let's say it happens like this, that somebody starts the firing. So you have newspaper reports saying that you've lost so many things, so many people, or you have somebody who has come across and killed some of our soldiers or civilians or whatever. And therefore, there is this clamor for exacting revenge. And that revenge is exacted, as the military says, at the time and place of their own choosing. That's the terminology which is employed. So, in essence, this becomes a purely revenge cycle. You do something to me, I'll do something to you. And what I do to you also can be revenged by, you can take revenge for that. So we can continue endlessly without actually achieving anything. Because that's where we have to look at. Any military exchange actually has its own Clausewitzian term, is grammar. It's got a grammar of its own. It doesn't have a logic of its own, but it's got a grammar. Grammar means that there are certain set of rules which will not they are understood. They're not written down, but they know that this is what there is a limitation here. So that rule has now been fairly established over a period of time that we won't go beyond a particular point. So within that cycle, we are now in a place where the purpose of military power is between purpose and military power. There has to be a connectivity. What is military power supposed to achieve? What is it that you want in political terms? And if you say in political terms, you are describing it, that you want him to stop infiltration, you want him to stop support to terrorism, then I think the instrumentality of getting that there is inadequate, because this exchange of firepower is not going to achieve that. That's for sure. So that is why it has decayed into a purely cycle of revenge, which means that it is a useless exchange of energy without achieving results politically, except, of course, being used for domestic purposes for both sides, to attract the international community and so on.
So in 2018, if India wants to end this cycle of revenge, what can we do? What can the Indian political establishment do?
I think it is not a question, both will want to do it. So as reports are indicating from the other side, that the Pakistanis would actually want a ceasefire in place, that the army chief actually told the parliament that he would support actually peace with India. So the issue is that this military cycle of revenge, which is continuing endlessly without purpose, can only be brought to a halt by political leadership on both sides. They have to take a decision that we must stop. We must first, as a first step, this is not the end of, we must first put the ceasefire back into place. After all, it is a BJP government which had put the ceasefire in place. So it is, they could easily do that if they want to, if the Pakistanis were willing. My guess is that the Pakistanis would support a ceasefire, and that it could be done if we want to, and modalities can always be worked out as to how this is going to be, so that both sides don't have to tell their domestic population that we asked for a ceasefire. So that can be managed diplomatically. So an agreement is there, we just have to implement it, and that calls for political wisdom and nothing more than that.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Pragati podcast and staying with us till the end.
Send us your questions, comments and brickbats by writing into podcast@thinkpragati.com. We're also on Twitter as @HamsiniH and @ZeusIsDead. You can find the Pragati podcast on the thinkpragati.com website and on your preferred podcast app. We're there everywhere.
As you can see, we have a podcast listener in his natural habitat. Millions of years of evolution have led him to this point. He's on his way to work, and listening to podcasts makes his miserable day better. He will now head to work and use all his knowledge to communicate with other colleagues and possibly future mates. You can find more of his species on ivmpodcasts.com, your one-stop destination where you can check out all the coolest Indian podcasts. Happy listening.